Welcome back to The Informed Investor. Today, Ash, we are going to have a chat about the bond process when a tenant vacates, what's involved in that, what owners should be aware about, and also what things they can claim versus what they can't.
All right, so tenant vacates or gives notice to vacate the property, and a property manager will go through and do the final bond inspection. So a final bond inspection is where they're using the ingoing report to do the final report. And the property manager will go through and just check how it compares. And the biggest problem with final bonds is the difference between wear and tear and damage.
Absolutely.
That's where, and this is where the grey area and the problems come up. Now, the property manager does this now quite often, well, actually, maybe correct me if I've got this wrong, but quite often this report, this final inspection, doesn't really necessarily need to go to the owner as such. I mean, a property manager is still emailing the owner just to say, hey, final's done, everything's good. Are they sending through a full report? Is that what people are expecting? I mean, I feel like it'd be quite overwhelming for the owner to receive a full report.
Look, everyone does things differently. I used to only include photos of anything that was wrong.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was not just for the owner, but for the tenant. If I was sending someone a final inspection report and it had 200 photos, how are they meant to find exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying that something needs to be rectified? So I would just take photos of any discrepancies. So if there was no mark on the wall before and there's now a mark on the wall, I take a photo of that. Maybe a couple of overall photos of the room as well, just so the owner can see the general gist of how the property is looking. But if I was sending them through, and also to the tenants, if I'm sending them through those reports, they're not reading that. They're not reading that. They're not going to actually understand what's required of them to rectify what's wrong here. So personally, that's how I would do it. I know some people will write full report, like ingoing report comments on their finals. So the property manager spends 3 hours at the property. They're going through, taking photos of everything, writing comments saying, all good as per ingoing condition report. Like it's just unnecessary because it is quite overwhelming for anyone that then opens that report to find what they need. So
Yeah.
I personally, I just recommend noting anything that is different.
Yeah.
I also would specify, so if I take a photo of something that's owner maintenance, I would make sure that I note that in the report, because otherwise I don't want to send the report through to the tenant and the owner and there's owner items that the tenant thinks I'm telling them they're responsible for.
Yeah.
So I found that I had to get in front of that. And what I would do as well is I would actually, now our software does this, but I used to send through a copy of the ingoing condition report with the final so that both parties could see this was the state when you moved in, this is now the state when you moved out. There's no way to dispute something if you've got the original report right there in the same email telling you exactly and showing you with the photos what state it was in then versus now.
Yeah. So the tenant gets that report with the discrepancies, and then that's when the negotiations start with the tenant with what they need to do. I mean, generally, they've already sent you through their cleaning and their carpet receipts. Again, this is going to be different for every state, but that's what they do. So in WA, they normally send that through. And then you have that discussion with the bond. And so once it's all agreed, it's pretty easy. It just goes through the process and gets sorted. But if a tenant also doesn't agree with the process, then it's settled separately through a more formal process. So one thing that does come up, probably actually one of the hardest things that comes up, I think, with bonds is sometimes when something's happened during the tenancy and tenants you sort of might go back to them and say, listen, this was missed or that was missed, or we noticed this is different. And then they bring up all these other things that they've done during the tenancy. Oh, well, I never got reimbursed for this, or I improved that. And it's sort of like, that's really hard. That's probably the hardest thing that I find, because like they're probably technically right, but then like that's a separate issue. Like,
if I had $1 for every time I heard it's better than when I moved in, I could retire early. Like that's a very famous phrase in property management, but that's the point of the ingoing property condition report. That is to document and prove the state of that property at the start of the tenancy. So it's so important that both tenants and owners understand what we do with those ingoing condition reports. we're going through the property and we are noting every single thing. So all of the fixtures, all of the walls, cupboards, like we are checking every single thing in that property, and we are taking photos and we are noting, is it clean? Is it working? Is it undamaged? The tenant, if they don't understand their responsibility with signing the ingoing condition report at the start of the tenancy. So in WA, they have 7 days from the date that they receive it to go through. They can agree or disagree and add in anything extra that they think we might have missed. If they don't understand at the start of the tenancy how important that is, and then they vacate and they try and say, oh, well, it was like that when I moved in the eyes of the court, if this is to go to court, that was their responsibility to note that down in the report, and our hands are tied. So it's really important that people understand how much actually goes into the ingoing condition reports and how they are used at the end of the tenancy, because that, to be honest, is the biggest way to avoid those disputes, is by having that clear written proof signed off on by the tenant of the state when they moved in.
And by far one of the most important documents. People don't ask to see a copy. People don't ask to see how the agency does it before choosing a property manager either, though, which is really interesting, because even internally, in the industry, to see different ways people have done their property condition reports can be quite different. I think it's a really, if someone said to me, can I see a copy of your inspection reports before, choosing our office, for example, that would be a pretty fair question to ask.
Well, we actually have them hyperlinked on our fee schedule. Yes. Routine inspections, our ingoing inspection. I can't remember if I've put in the final inspection, but they're all hyperlinked on our fee schedule so people can see an example of what the reports look like.
You should see what it looks like with your whoever you're using for property management, just to see the quality of it. And like you said, it's an important document. Everything needs to be noted. And that is really, to be honest, the easiest way to manage any bond issues at the end. It's when you have problems with it, it's generally, when you have problems with the bond, it's generally because you don't have a good enough property condition report.
Yep, exactly.
That's the only reason.
It prevents so many issues, just having that written proof to back yourself up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it also helps for the property manager to explain to the owner when they're sending through the final inspection. I used to give both my tenants and owners a call when I'd send it through. I think it can be quite jarring to get the report through if you haven't had one before, and you might just see this long list of issues as a tenant. Sometimes that's typically when they will kick up, and that's when you get those kind of nasty emails and things like that. So I found by taking that proactive approach of calling them and saying, hey, look, property was in great condition, you just missed XYZ. I'll send you through a report shortly. We'll organise for you to go back or whatever we might be doing. That just kind of got to the problem before it became one.
Yeah.
So I would do that with my owners as well. I would give them a call and say, hey, property was in great condition. This is noted for the tenant, which I'll sort. Owner side of maintenance, look, I've noted that the gutters are really rusted or whatever it might be. Giving them a call and kind of running them through it really does make a big difference. I see a lot of property managers sometimes spending too much time detailing what needs to be done. So it depends on what inspection software you use. Sometimes it will summarize the list of tenant items or owner items. Other times people will manually go through and write that list or put it in an email. So every agency and every property manager does it differently. But I think it is really important to understand the responsibilities of both parties. But fair wear and tear is definitely, I think it's the bane of every property manager's existence, because how do you define that? I'm pretty sure there is a short definition in the Act, but it's actually, in the WA Residential Tenancies Act. But if you're dealing with something like, say it's a scratch on the floor, but it's in a high traffic area in the hallway and the property is 30 years old, how are you then going to handle that? Is it reasonable to think, okay, well, this tenant's been in the property for 6 years, there might be a couple of scratches on the floor. Those are things that have happened from them living in the property. It's not like they've gone out of their way to damage it. That is fair wear and tear. But trying to explain that to owners and trying to be that middleman and trying to mediate between what's fair, what's not, is really difficult. And it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
How often do you think, or how much time do you think a property manager would spend on a full vacate process if you're taking into account the final bond inspection and then negotiations? What do you think the average time is?
Well, I'll tell you how much owners are getting charged for in terms of the value of it. If you're paying a final bond inspection, generally that has allowed for 2 hours. The fee is reflective of 2 hours of property management work. And I know that's not how long it's taken them.
Not even close.
No.
No.
Is there an average that we're finding PMs are spending, do you think? I mean, I reckon they're probably spending overall probably 5-ish, 6-ish hours. That's not even going to court. That's just
I'd say that's pretty good average.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a property where everything's in great condition, like if it's a nice, easy final inspection where everything's as per the ingoing condition report, there's nothing to negotiate. You just do the report, do the final, the bond disposal, and everything's done. I would say maybe 3 to 4 hours, absolute max.
Yeah.
Because you still got about 2 hours for the final. You still got about an hour back in office, making sure the report's finalized and sent off. And then typically about, I'd say an hour is like a max just for the communication side of things, calculating the final invoices, things like that for utilities. If it's a bad tenancy, not all tenancies are going to be insurance claims or court attendances. It might just be a really difficult tenant or maybe an owner that doesn't really have realistic expectations on how the property should be returned. The property manager can be spending 10 plus hours just the report itself. First of all, I've had final inspections take up to 4 hours when there was a lot of damage. So you've got completing the report, sending it off, and then it's just the negotiation. And it's not just the, the physical time that the property manager is spending on it, but you also have to think about the emotional and mental toll that takes on property managers. If we were to ask our team what their biggest pain point is in property management, 100% it's final inspections.
Yeah, every time.
And if you're having a staff member that's maybe stressed or not, they're not doing too well, they're under the pump, if we ask them what's wrong, what's it going to be? Finals. Because these things they take with them. There's that worry of being the middleman and trying to make sure that you meet everyone's expectations. You're working for the owner, so we want to make sure that we are following their instructions and acting in their best interest. But you also have to make sure that we're following legislation and educating the owner to understand what is reasonable. And then if it does end up going to court, that's a really stressful experience.
Yeah.
You never know what magistrate you're going to get on the day. Some of them are pretty mean. So it's there's so many things to it, and people don't realize it's not as easy as just doing the report, sending it off, sending a couple of work orders and done. There's so much involved in being the middleman and being that negotiation person that really can build up. Because then when you think about how much, if you've got the mental toll of that, and then they're trying to focus on other tasks in their day and that's kind of looming over them, it takes them away from everything else. So the 2 hours of time that we're charging for versus what is actually involved.
I think the majority of property management fees, like for what other people charge as well, is literally only allowing for a clean, quick, easy, full bond refund done. And that's probably, what do we find? Like, is it
I'd
50%
say
would be a clean, or even less than that would be a clean, full bond refund back?
I used to say about 1 in 3.
I'm actually excited with the bonds online because now when we submit the disposal, you have to put the categories of what the breakdown is, which we haven't had to do before. And I'm really hoping that they use that data to give us some information on what most tenancy bond deductions are. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think it will be, look, I wouldn't expect them to be giving us that information.
Don't you reckon?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I thought they might.
So they've given us a little bit of information in terms of what pet requests the owner tried to decline and then the commissioner overruled. Other than that, they really haven't given us any sort of statistics or background information. Like, it would be nice if they did give us that, because this July will be 2 years, 2 years since that came into effect.
For the pet bonds and minor mod.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. So it would be nice if they kind of gave us a check-in and say, hey, so this is how it's been going. I think it is 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
So if we could have that kind of information, it is really handy when we are speaking to owners. And I guess I'm kind of going off topic here, but the information they have given us for pet requests, I have actually referred to, and I have that link saved on my computer because when I have had those discussions with owners about when you can decline pets, a lot of people, especially if they're in different states, they don't understand what legislation we've brought in here. trying to give them an example of when the commissioner has actually approved an owner declining that pet request. They had a long list of commissioner decisions, and I think only one of them the commissioner had actually approved and said, yes, I agree that property's not fit for a pet.
Yeah, okay.
So to be able to have that information handy and send people that link so they can read through and see what sort of requests are being put forward and what is actually, I guess, coming through from the commissioner, I found that was really handy.
Yeah, for sure. There's two things that I think we should just mention in this conversation. One is if a property manager's at loggerheads with let's just call it damage blind. Damage blind, and the tenant says, I'm not responsible, but the owner says they are, and you got a new tenant moving in, so you got to move on with this problem, and you just go, listen, we're just going to have to put it through to courts because no one's signing off on this bond disposal. Go to courts and let them make a decision. Quite often, the owner would have to pay for that blind to be replaced, but then a property manager would be saying, listen, you're going to have to pay for it first. We're going to put it through and try and get this, put this through the bond. But there's a chance that the magistrate is going to say, actually, no, the tenant's correct and you're not. And then you have to be aware that you're going to be like out of pocket for that. So I guess from an owner's point of view, you want to make sure that you genuinely believe and are happy to pay for the cost either way.
Yeah.
Because that's
because
the
otherwise you're stuck with it.
Correct. And you can't really go in there with compensation these days with courts, only for some things, maybe like a burn on a carpet maybe, but it's going to be way too hard. You need to have an invoice.
Yeah. You can't bring a quote in anymore. It has to be an invoice.
Yeah.
And you also need to be charging, like when you're calculating the cost, it has to be relative to the area damaged and also the age of whether the item is damaged, which I think a lot of people don't realize. Sure, maybe you weren't looking at replacing the floorboards anytime soon. We understand that. But if the floorboards are 15 years old, we have to account that when we're calculating the depreciation on what item we're actually trying to claim.
I use this example is that there was a furnished property and there was 6 chairs and 1 chair was damaged. And the owner wanted all 6 chairs replaced because it was a matching set. And it was like, no, you can literally only charge for that one. And I remember the owner being so upset. And I actually sort of understand where they're coming from. Like I get it.
You can understand.
You're not going to go replace it with one random chair. But from a tenant's point of view, they only damaged 1 chair. They're only going to reimburse for 1 chair. And so I use that because I feel like that's sometimes that analogy people understand, like that you can't or if it's carpet and it's like, well, it doesn't match the others because, well, it's just the way it is. It's only one room. Like,
what's the most ridiculous claim you've heard of?
Gosh, it's been a while since I've done one. I can only share just a recent one that I did, that one that I did a couple of weeks ago. And the owner, before the final had even been done, had been emailing to say, make sure that, those blinds are going to need to be replaced. And I didn't actually even get into a discussion with him prior because I thought I'm not going to email back. I haven't even seen it. It's going to wait till I've seen the property. I'll then email him properly. So I go to this property and it's those stupid micro metal Venetians.
Oh, they're a nightmare. Oh. You can't clean them without breaking. Like they bend, they snap.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you have them, it's because you were too cheap at the start to go and get proper blinds. Like they are literally the cheapest blinds that you can get. So I sort of don't feel sorry for landlords that have them and they bend. And I'm just wondering whether the person listening during the producing of the podcast has micro Venetians in his home because of the giggle that you've got that maybe you've got them at home. This client had him and he was like harping on, make sure those blinds are going to need to be replaced. So I did this final bond. And the blinds, I swear to God, like so good that there was a proper property condition report. Exactly. I'm literally taking photos of like as soon as it was like after the final bond inspection and side by side, I made sure that photo was like the exact angle as that ingoing so that I could email it to, and they were the same. And I feel like I must have worded a pretty good email because he didn't respond back to me. So I feel like that was
really hit the nail on the head there.
I did, and there was no room for like any comeback. And I did say to the tenant, listen, leave it with me. This is my job. I'll deal with this because they knew that this was something that had come up. And I put it through to the owner. But also what I found out was that these blinds, there was a sticker on them. They were installed in 2007. They were 19 years old. And yes, they did have some bends, but they don't need replacing. Like they're absolutely fine as they are. 19 years old, and he was still
expecting them to be brand new.
And it's like, even if the tenant had trashed them, I probably still couldn't do anything about that. You know, that was probably the most ridiculous one. But I was so good. I did this email. I'm doing the before and after. I also reminded that they were installed in 2007 as per the sticker on the blind. And yeah, so yeah, that was
and you never heard back.
So. Never heard back. Yes. Hopefully he's not traveling, and I'm going to hear back from him next month or something because he does travel. But yeah, that was probably the most ridiculous. But I think that one thing that's really, really hard and very frustrating is when landlords do expect properties just to be exactly the same when they're returned, because and if we can maybe just do touch on that wear and tear and the definition, I think at the end of the day, like anything that's not malicious, but like, you know, for example, carpets, they're going to wear more in a traffic area. Mm-hmm. That's not anyone being malicious. That's wear and tear. You've decided to put carpet at your front door. That is going to discolor. That is going to happen. I mean, yes, there's things that you could do to prevent that by getting the tenants to put a runner and stuff like that, but you can't force a tenant to put a runner on there. Where there would probably be where it's not wear and tear, in my opinion, is like if you've got wood floors and you've got dining chairs and the tenant hasn't put the felt things underneath the dining chair, or maybe study chairs, and that scratching back and forth has scratched it. You could argue to say, well, it's just normal use of a chair going back and forth. It could be argued, but it's probably, I would say, well, you could have actually maybe prevented that. What do you think?
I agree. There's a common one that I used to see was carpet in studies. If people didn't put like a plastic mat down or any sort of protection down on the carpet and they had a chair with wheels, it would cause the carpet to ripple. That's not, you know, there was something that could have been done to prevent it. I think that's probably a good way to frame it, is when you're looking at something and you're trying to determine which way it goes. Is it fair wear and tear? Is it not? Is there a reasonable measure that the tenant could have taken to have stopped that from happening? So walking, you know, if you're in a high traffic area and there's some minor scratches on the flooring or some minor chips to lower levels of walls and they've been there, because you have to also take into consideration it's not just the age of that specific asset, but it's also how long the tenant has been in the property. So if you've got a tenant that moves into a property and they move out within the first year and there's a lot of damage to the freshly painted walls, that's a bit different versus a tenant that's been there for 5 years, 7 years. So you have to think about the length of the tenancy when you're also looking at these things. But if there's something reasonable, a reasonable measure that they could have taken to stop that from happening, like putting down a plastic mat on the study carpet or putting felt tips on the dining chairs, I think that's a pretty easy way to determine it.
And even like, you know, in the kitchen, using a chopping board to cut or having a heat mat for...
That horrifies me. Who's cutting on the raw bench?
It's actually disgusting, isn't it?
That's disgusting.
That's what I think, yeah.
Because are you not cleaning your bench properly with cleaning products?
Yeah. I know.
I'm not putting on spray and wipe on my bench and then cutting my food on that. That's disgusting.
That's what I think. Yeah.
That's terrible.
I know, but it still does happen. But, you know, then you've got your heat mat that you put your
hot pans
and stuff on. So, you know, that things like that. One thing that I mean, and this is where it all just becomes so questionable, but like if we think about that traffic area, I have had this happen before. I can't remember what the result was, but like, you know, like, have I got probably bad shoes? Let me see if I can bring them up to the camera, like shoes that heels like that. And where the little stopper comes off and then it's the nail.
Yeah.
And a lot of females, when I was young, I didn't actually realize it happened until I was on my hands and knees cleaning my floors one day and I was like, oh, I can see little holes, little indents. Have you ever had that happen?
No.
Oh my God, really? Don't you ever get your stopper of your heel come off?
No.
Oh
I don't think I've ever had that happen. Yeah. But I have tiles and I don't have floorboards.
Oh no.
And I grew up with tiles as well, so.
Yeah, no. So what happens is your stopper comes off the bottom of your shoe and there's like the screws there.
Oh my God.
And then what happens is you are like walking through the house with your shoes on. Now, technically you're not doing anything malicious. You're just walking through the house with your shoes on, but they actually indent your wood floors. So when I had must have been like a Maori wood floor and and they would have indents. So that is something that happens. So you could sort of say, well, is that preventable? Is that something you would like charge a tenant because they haven't taken their shoes off at the front? But I think the thing is that you can't tell somebody how to live as well. Some people wear shoes in houses, some people don't. You can't tell people they can't wear shoes inside a house. Or hold on, do you tell people you can't wear shoes?
No, but I'm just thinking I have had owners tell me that.
I know. And you can say to them, like, I'll do my best. I can't monitor them 24/7. The only time I've actually probably let an owner dictate something was when he had this beautiful bathroom and it was a very porous like stone, and it could literally you could only use certain shower gels in the shower. And I was like, how am I going to tell a tenant what they can wash with? Like,
okay, but that's just ridiculous. If you're renting out a property, you need to be, and I understand they might have bought the property or lived in it themselves with that material.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that not everyone's going to live the way that you live. You can't tell people to use a specific shower gel because
the tenant was supplied with shower gel for their lease agreement.
Oh God, okay.
I think Crystal managed the property. I think they're probably a bit more relaxed now, but when we first rented it out, they did supply.
And I guess that's the thing, and that's so following on from our last podcast recording, I actually have started having these conversations with owners, is finding out, do they have an emotional attachment to the property? What's their investment strategy? What's their investment story? Because of things like that, where they might have lived in that house and built it themselves, and they might have specifically chosen that stone for the shower, and there's that attachment to it. But if you're an owner and you're in the position where you're building to rent the property out, please pick materials that are hardy and they are not going to have specific shower gels that have to be used, or, you know, you can't wear heels on those specific floorboards. Like, you have to think about the fact that people are living in these properties, and you also need to think about the fact, like, what would you do if you were living there? For that owner, maybe they did only use that specific shower gel.
Yeah.
But if you were in your own property and you accidentally chipped a wall on the lower level when you're moving in, what are you going to do? Like, you have to think about it from that other perspective of these things do happen.
Yeah.
Like, tenants aren't perfect. They're people living in there and they are allowed to live their lives. We can only dictate so much.
Yeah.
We can't tell them how to live.
No.
And that comes into, I guess, the routine inspection side of it, which we'll touch on later. But you can't tell people to live a certain way. They do have freedom. There's only so much that we can dictate when it comes to managing the property. And if they're in their day-to-day use are causing a bit of wear on the property, well, that's just what it's like when you have property. If you live in it, it's going to wear just the same.
Correct. But you don't notice it because you're living in it, so you don't notice it as much. Do you remember one of our PMs in WA, she had a owner that didn't want bacon to be cooked inside the house? Do you remember that one?
I do remember that one. Yeah.
There's lots of weird stuff. I think there's every now and then there's like, you can't, someone can't cook meat on the barbecue on the balcony because like the neighbours don't like, the meat smell, like, or...
Oh, well, yeah. If we start talking about the sort of restrictions from strata, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, but there's I also think that it's worth, just as a bit of a last thing to mention, that the final bonds in the US are done, and I just love the way that they do it. And I don't know if the rent ready freshen up.
I'd love it if we could do that.
That's right. And then no one's getting bogged down with, oh, there's an extra scratch on the door, or oh, the tenants put 2 more chips in there. Like, it's really like, I think that, we've got to be really start changing, or I know this is a conversation and we've got the investor audience, but I guess I want property managers to have better conversations with owners and not pinpointing, like we're so accustomed to pinpoint these scratches and there was 5 chips and there was this, that. Like, do we have to keep on mentioning? I know we have to, because you guys that are listening are expecting that, but maybe we can just like one by one start changing that landlord's mindset that, guess what? You haven't painted the property for 4 years, so they're not charging the vacate tenant anything, like, because you got to paint it in 2 years' time. Like,
I think that comes back to a BDM conversation as well.
Yeah.
Not just the property manager. Like, it comes from both sides, but from the BDM side, if you're bringing on a new property, it's about managing those expectations with the owner from the very start. So what's reasonable and what's not. And so I think it is really important to have those conversations, because the BDM is the one that's seeing the property at the start when they're having those discussions with the owners. So they can actually walk through and say, look, the walls, when were they last painted? Oh, okay, about 5 years ago. Perfect. Just so you're aware, if we move a tenant in, there's going to be a bit more wear on the property. I'd recommend in a couple of years we repaint. Like those sort of things, if we manage those expectations and we have those conversations from the start, will help so much when it then comes to the end of the tenancy and saving conflict from both parties.
Yeah.
And then also it can mean that we are managing better maintained properties.
Yeah.
From a business side, and also from us in terms of what we would see as an ideal client, we want to be working with owners that understand that their property needs to be maintained and needs to have a freshen up every 7 years for paint or whatever it might be, or they understand. We want to make sure that they actually understand what's reasonable and what's not, and how much these things can also affect the value of their property when it comes to releasing.
Yeah. And I mean, like if every owner painted their house every 7 years as per the depreciation, the world would be a better place, wouldn't it?
Absolutely agreed.
But like, yeah, but owners aren't going to have a slush fund for like if painting costs $7,000, for example, that means that every year $1,000 of your rent needs to be put aside for painting. But they don't. You then call them up to say you need $7,000. I need $7,000 to paint. And they're like, I don't have it. And then that's when I think maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's when they go back and they go, well, the last tenant did this and the last tenant did that. And instead of like not looking at the big picture, it's not about those extra little chips. It's not about that. It's about the fact that you are responsible. Well, you're not responsible, but it's reasonable to have your house painted every 7 years.
How often do we think that actually happens?
I can tell you right now that owners are like, oh, I only had my house painted a couple of years ago. And then you actually
it's 15 years ago.
Correct. Because time flies.
It was perfect when I handed it over, when I lived in it. Oh, when was that? Yeah, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's not going to be perfect anymore.
Yeah. Old mate with the blinds, I think pretty sure he thought these blinds were installed 5 years ago.
That's why it's very important to keep receipts, keep invoices, keep records.
Because we're going to find them.
Yeah.
And we're going to bring them up when we need to. Amazing. Good chat. And I guess if anyone has any questions on final bond inspections or the process, then you're welcome to always reach out to SoCo Realty.
Amazing. Thanks, Ash.